He looked me up and down in the kitchen that Tuesday morning, the way you'd look at a piece of furniture you were thinking of throwing out. Slow, deliberate. Like he was taking inventory of everything he no longer wanted. And then he said it, calm as anything, like it cost him nothing at all. "You've really aged, you know that? You're not the same woman I married." I was 44 years old. I was wearing a navy blazer I had bought specifically for that day. My hair was pulled back. I had barely slept. And in my bag, sitting right there on the kitchen counter, 12 inches from his coffee mug, was a signed contract from Harrington and Cole Consulting that had taken me 11 years, 3 pay cuts during company restructuring, 2 maternity leaves, and every ounce of discipline I had ever possessed to earn. Senior Vice President of Operations, a salary that made the number I used to dream about look modest. I didn't say a word. I picked up my bag. I walked to my car. I sat in the driveway for 4 minutes, and I stared at the oak tree we had planted together the year we moved in, the one that was now taller than the house. And then I thought, he has no idea. And something shifted in me, quietly, permanently, like a door closing on a draft. My name is Claire. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the middle daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who worked a front desk at a dental office for 31 years, without ever once asking for a raise because, she told me, "You don't make waves, Claire. You just keep swimming." I loved my mother. I also spent the better part of my adult life unlearning everything she modeled for me about staying small. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was 31, already working in commercial real estate, broad-shouldered and confident in the way that men who have never been told no tend to be. On our 3rd date, he told me I was the most intelligent woman he had ever taken out to dinner. And I remember the warmth of that. I held it like something precious. Now I understand that a man telling a woman she is smart on a 3rd date is not a compliment. It is an announcement of what he intends to use her for. We married when I was 28. By 29, I was pregnant with our daughter, Megan. By 31, our son, Tyler. I kept working through both pregnancies. I was already 4 years into my career at Harrington and Cole, a mid-size operations consultancy with offices in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Charlotte. I was good at my job from the beginning. I am not saying that to be arrogant. I am saying it because it matters to the story. Because the thing that Daniel spent years subtly dismantling was the one thing I had built entirely on my own. He never told me to quit working. He was smarter than that. Instead, he said things like, "You seem really stressed. Maybe you should think about scaling back." And, "The kids need you more at home right now." And, "I just worry about you, Claire. You're spreading yourself too thin." He said these things with such practiced concern that for years I genuinely believed they came from love. They didn't. They came from the specific discomfort that some men feel when the woman beside them starts taking up more space than they were allocated. The first time I was passed over for a promotion, I was 34. Daniel made me dinner, poured me wine, rubbed my shoulders, said, "Maybe it just wasn't the right fit. Maybe it means something better is coming." And I cried a little and felt grateful for him. The second time, at 37, he said, "Claire, have you ever thought that maybe the corporate track just isn't for everyone?" I didn't cry that time. I went to bed early and lay in the dark and felt something that I didn't have language for yet. Something that felt like being slowly erased. What I did not know, what I would not find out until much later, was that at 37, Daniel was already bored. Not professionally, personally. He had been having what I can only describe as an ongoing emotional and physical arrangement with a woman named Brianna, who worked as a leasing agent at one of the properties his firm managed. She was 30. I don't say that number the way it is usually said in these stories, with bitterness or comparison. I say it because it is the number Daniel apparently said to himself when he looked in the mirror. She is 30, and I am the kind of man who can attract someone who is 30. And that number became more important to him than our 16 years together. I found out the way most women find out. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was a Saturday in February. Tyler had a basketball tournament. Megan was at a friend's house. And I picked up Daniel's phone to check the time because mine was charging in the other room. And there was a message on the screen. Visible, not hidden. From B. Last night was everything. When can I see you again? I put the phone back. I finished making my coffee. I drove Tyler to his basketball tournament, and I cheered for him, and I bought him a hot dog at halftime, and I smiled at the other parents, and I drove home, and I put a load of laundry in, and I made dinner, and I did not say a single word. That is the part that surprises people when I tell them. They expect me to describe the screaming, the confrontation, the throwing of things. But I had grown up watching my mother swallow every sharp feeling she ever had. And in that specific moment, without planning it, I did the opposite. I swallowed nothing. I felt everything, clearly and completely, and I made a decision. I was not going to react. I was going to act. I called my friend Deborah the next morning, on a walk, without my phone. I borrowed hers. Deborah had been through a divorce 4 years earlier, and she had 2 pieces of advice. Document everything, and call Karen Whitfield. Karen Whitfield was a family law attorney in Dublin, Ohio, with a reputation that Daniel's colleagues referenced in hushed, respectful tones when their own marriages started showing cracks. I called Karen that afternoon from a payphone outside a Walgreens. Yes, there are still payphones in certain parts of Ohio. I was as surprised as you are. Karen's first question was, "Are you safe?" Her second question was, "Do you have your own financial accounts?" Her third question was, "How long do you need?" I told her 6 months. She told me that was smart. Those 6 months were the most focused I had ever been in my life. I want to be honest about that. There was grief, real grief, the kind that hits you at 2 a.m. when you're lying beside someone and you can feel the distance between you like a physical thing, like weather. The kind that arrives when you're folding his shirts and you think, I have folded these shirts 1,000 times, and that number makes you tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. I grieved the version of Daniel I had believed in. I grieved the marriage I had thought we were building. And then I got up and I went to work. I opened a personal checking account at a credit union across town, one he had no knowledge of. I began quietly transferring the portion of my paycheck that I was legally entitled to retain for personal use. I went through 7 years of tax returns, bank statements, and mortgage documents with Karen's paralegal on 3 separate Saturday mornings while Daniel thought I was at a spin class. I made copies of everything. I kept them in a folder at Deborah's house. And at work, I became something else entirely. I don't know how to explain it, except to say that for 11 years, I had been performing at about 70% of my actual capacity, because some part of me had absorbed Daniel's low ceiling for what I was allowed to be. In those 6 months, I stopped performing. I just worked. I restructured a logistics process for a client in Charlotte that saved them $2.3 million in the first quarter. I presented a 3-year operational roadmap to our executive team that my director later told me was the most comprehensive internal document he had seen in his tenure at the firm. I was not trying to prove anything to Daniel. I was trying to remember who I actually was. In November, my director called me into his office and told me they were creating a new senior leadership position and that my name was the first and only name on the list. Senior Vice President of Operations. The salary was $187,000 plus bonus and equity. I signed the contract on a Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. I walked in the door at 7:52 p.m. that evening, and Daniel looked at me from the kitchen counter, the way he had been looking at me for years without me fully seeing it. And he said, "You've really aged. You know that? You're not the same woman I married." I didn't answer him. I set my bag on the counter. I reached inside. I took out my phone, not to show him the contract, not yet, because that moment deserved more than a kitchen counter. I opened the camera, and I turned it to face me. I looked at myself, 44 years old, fine lines at the corners of my eyes, silver threading through the hair at my temples that I had stopped coloring 8 months ago. A face that had been through 2 childbirths, 3 rounds of fertility treatment before Megan, the death of my father, 16 years of a marriage that was asking me to be less than I was. I looked at myself, and I thought, I have never looked more like myself in my life. I turned the phone around and showed him the screen. Not the contract, the camera, his own face looking back at him. "I think you are trying to tell me something about yourself," I said, and I walked upstairs. I filed in January. Karen was extraordinary, methodical, precise, and completely without sentiment, which is exactly what I needed. Daniel hired a lawyer from a firm downtown who apparently had a reputation for aggression, which Karen described with a small smile as useful for me. Aggressive lawyers have a way of overplaying their hand when the other side has done their homework. We had been married 16 years. We had 2 children. We had a house in Worthington that had appreciated $210,000 since we bought it. We had 2 retirement accounts, a joint investment portfolio, and a joint savings account that Daniel had been making small, consistent withdrawals from for approximately 2 years. Amounts modest enough to avoid attention, cumulative enough to matter. Karen's forensic accountant identified $34,700 that had moved through accounts I had never been told about. The discovery process, as they call it, is where prepared people win and unprepared people lose. I was prepared, Daniel was not. He had believed, I think genuinely, and that is almost the saddest part, that I did not know. That the woman he had described as aging and not the same was also somehow not watching, not recording, not building a case with quiet precision for 6 months while he poured himself bourbon and watched football and carried on with a 30-year-old leasing agent named Brianna as though the walls of the house had no memory. They do. Walls remember everything. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday in March. I kept the house. I kept my retirement account in full. I received a portion of the joint investment portfolio and a settlement figure that Karen had negotiated with a calmness that I still think about when I need to model composure. Daniel moved into an apartment in Grandview. I heard through mutual friends that Brianna had ended things 3 months into the divorce proceedings, which, if you are keeping score, means she was never a reason. She was a symptom. Megan was 17 when we told the kids. She cried, then she asked if she could redecorate her room. Tyler was 14. He was quiet for a week, and then he came to me on a Sunday evening and said, "Mom, are you going to be okay?" And I looked at my 14-year-old son, and I felt the full weight of what I wanted to model for him. Not what my mother had modeled for me, not silence and endurance and the flattening of oneself to keep the peace, but something different. I'm going to be better than okay, I told him, and I want you to watch. I turned 45 in August, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Deborah threw me a dinner party. There were 12 women around a long table in her backyard, string lights overhead, good wine, a cake that said 45 and unfiltered in gold frosting. I wore a red dress I had bought the week before, without asking anyone's opinion, and I looked exactly as old as I was, and I have never felt more beautiful in my life. My director nominated me for a Regional Leadership Award in October. I won it. There is a small crystal thing on my desk at work that catches the afternoon light and throws it across the wall in fragments, and I look at it sometimes between calls, and I think about that kitchen, that Tuesday morning, that look. Here is what I know now, at 45, that I did not fully understand at 28. A man who needs to diminish you is a man who has already calculated that your success is a problem for him. The commentary about aging, about not being the same, about having changed, that was never about my face. It was about the fact that I was becoming more myself, and that frightened him. And frightening men who are afraid of you is not your responsibility to manage. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not at 28, not at 44, not ever. The oak tree in the front yard of my house, the one we planted together, the one that grew taller than the roof, it's still there. I look at it every morning when I leave for work. I used to think of it as something we built together. Now I think of it differently. It grew because it was watered, and because it had enough light, and because nothing cut it down before it was ready. That's the whole story, really. Give the thing enough light. Don't let anyone cut it down. And when someone looks at what you've become and calls it too much, you stand there in your navy blazer with your signed contract in your bag, and you let them finish. And then you leave.